you don't think if you question Anthony Fauci, you're questioning science was terrible messaging and something that Fox News can play over and over and over and over again to make people feel concerned?
Well, it's true. He was our scientific advocate on this issue. He was the guy, and people were questioning science and continue to all the time. Like that's true though. Masks do reduce the likelihood of spreading the disease. The vaccine does help and isn't changing your DNA or hurting you. Like, it sounds arrogant, but like that's literally the man's job, right? Like he's literally the guy, or I guess like was. I mean, he's probably not going to preside over another pandemic because he's a million years old, but like that is his job. This is the one thing that he's supposed to do. And he did it, and he didn't do perfectly, but overwhelmingly, like, yeah, questioning him is questioning the science. I mean, is it
absurd
not?
to me, man? Yeah. It seems absurd.
Well, how?
Like,
But
would you?
he's a scientist.
Would you? Sure, but there was plenty of scientists, and you're going to say they're crackpots, but there was plenty of scientists that disagreed with him at varying levels of this, whether it was on the lab leak, whether it was on masks, whether it was on vaccines, whether it was on lockdowns, whether it was on the virality of the Omicron variant versus the Delta variant. Like,
Well,
people disagreed with him regularly that were scientists.
yeah, that's how science works. It's a collaborative process. It's a discourse. There will always be people who disagree. There are even like climate scientists who disagree on climate change. They're dumb, but they exist, right? Like, it doesn't change the fact that, overwhelmingly you still have to arrive at a consensus, especially if you're trying to enforce policy. I mean, if you want to do policy, you can't do this like, well, people are, up in the air on it, because people are up in the air on everything. People still debate evolution, right? Like you have to settle on the most probable set of solutions, and you have to stick to it, because otherwise you can't get anything done.
The what we're talking about earlier, Fauci is the science, that wasn't a bad thing. I'm not talking about crackpot kooks. You can find scientists who disagreed with him on all sorts of things. But
like,
if it was against CDC,
okay,
hold on. But if it was against CDC policy, or if it was against NIH, then you got a little thing on your YouTube, on your Instagram, that says this person's full of shit. And we're not talking about a Joe Rogan episode. We're talking about, like, hey, here's this scientist at Stanford that isn't super fond of the mRNA vaccines, or here's a scientist at Johns Hopkins that doesn't like the mask mandates.
Okay, wait, you're doing the thing right now. So yeah, a lot of these people really were full of shit. And you weren't flagged on YouTube for being critical of the mask mandates. It was specifically COVID disinfo. So lying about the vaccine or about the disease itself. Critiques of policy were not getting people flagged. Everyone who mentioned COVID-19 was getting the little blurb underneath their YouTube video, but that was because YouTube wanted to attach like a little nugget of truth just in case the video was stupid bullshit. But like, in terms of the COVID-19 like censorship disinfo shit, that wasn't just anyone who questioned the narrative or whatever. That was about people who were lying. And like you say, like the mRNA vaccine, who's questioning the mRNA vaccine? Are you talking about that one guy who said that he was critical in its production process from like 20 years ago, and it turns out he was completely full of shit? Or are we talking about like Brett Weinstein, who was saying that he's like,
no? Are you talking about what's his name, Malone? I think.
It's fine. There were like 50 million people who made their careers lying about COVID. There were.
What I'm saying is, like, the point I'm making isn't about any specific doctor. I'm just saying.
But then, like, who was unfairly shafted? Because I'm okay with these people getting smacked down. Like, they're literally killing people. Like, they're going on and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars to tell their audience of retards, like, yeah, don't wear masks and don't get the vaccines. And they're killing people. As far as I'm concerned, they're murdering them. Morally, I don't hold them any less accountable than if they'd shot them themselves. They're making money off killing people, lying deliberately. A lot of them deliberately lying. They're right-wing propagandists. They're not all like that person who used to work like for Greenpeace or whatever, who now spends his time lying about climate change. Like, they know they're lying. They're making money off of it. So I don't care. Like,
I have no idea who you're talking about.
Sorry, there's a lot of like lying fake scientists. So I don't care if YouTube smacks them down, right? Like. And then people are like, oh, well, couldn't YouTube smack anyone down? Well, first of all, yes, it's their website. They can with their TOS policy. But also, this is a pretty unprecedented thing. It's like, it's a massive pandemic. And then you have this like cottage industry of grifters who spring up to start lying, very obviously lying about COVID. Like, doesn't something have to be done about that? Literally, like, I'm not a free speech extremist here. If the consequence of free speech, in this case meaning YouTube not having a terms of service agreement, but if the consequence of free speech means like hundreds of thousands more people die and the pandemic ravages unchecked, then like, fuck it, dude. Yeah, okay. In the same way that, like, you know, we don't have free speech protections for people who engage in harassment or death threats. Technically, death threats are speech, but we decided they're not free speech because the consequences of letting people just running around making death threats was a lot worse than the consequences of the state not protecting that behavior.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if we're going to agree on like the level to which free speech is, but I
mean, do you think people should be able to like willy-nilly death threat? I mean, isn't it probably a good... Yeah, but that is the state censoring. Like you can be arrested for that. Like you can go to jail for years and years and years because you said.
And I think threats of violence are pretty much my threshold on speech. Like, yeah, there's a lot of dumb shit people say, but there's a lot of like take COVID out of it. There's been a lot of scientific advancement from people who have been outside of the mainstream on whatever was the hegemonic view in the scientific community, and if they had the ability to shut those people up, we wouldn't have gotten along.
No, that's bullshit. We're not talking about scientific critique of the mainstream through rigorous research. We're talking about YouTubers making a living, going on podcasts to lie, provably lie, about an existing and medically necessary scientific, like, no, you can't group all these people in together. You can't do this like, well, the Catholic Church wanted to kill Galileo in response to like Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein jerking themselves off over ivermectin. You can't, we have to distinguish between useful speech and not useful speech in this context, because otherwise curtailing any of it is seen as an attack against all of it, when in reality, the only reason the messaging from the CDC changed is because scientific inquiry is still alive and well. When you complain about Fauci changing his messaging, but what you're looking at is a process of scientific discovery and correction that's been going on for years now. It's not like scientists who work for like Pfizer who come out with studies are being like censored because it contradicts the narrative. Like on the back end of things, the real scientists are still doing lots of work. The problem is like on the front end of things, a lot of people are making a lot of money. So that's a really good way of separating them, okay? Real scientists do not make extra sources of income from their like political podcasts or like Substacks. That's not really a thing. People who actually advance their fields in like virology or biology or whatever are in that grind set shit. They're not media trained. They are not like public facing, you know, we're going to unveil the truth, whatever. And they certainly don't talk about like the results of their ongoing research. They just do their research, publish it. It's slow, it's frustrating, but they're busy, you know? Sorry, I'm like totally rambling right now, but like it's just
you're okay.
Yeah, it's just I don't know. Something has to be done about that, because like obviously if we let all information run through the exact same filter and the bullshit and the real info is held to the same standard, we get the problem we have right now, which is not everyone fucking vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, I do take your point on that. Like, I understand where you're coming from. I have a hard time with any like the way it appeared to someone who's not in policy or in science from the outside, and someone who's not anti-science or conservative or whatever, is just anything that contradicted any part of the policy was shut down immediately. You couldn't question it. And that's what started my email to you in the first place, was the lab leak shit. And they handled that terribly. And it seems to be that it's most likely that it's from the lab, right? And
I mean,
you're going to do the
FBI
I never saw any
said
of this thing, but
the FBI
we can find
said,
articles of the lab leak's a dangerous conspiracy theory.
Well, it is.
Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, something can be true, but initially still be a dangerous conspiracy theory. Like, whether or not something is a conspiracy theory has more to do with the information you use to arrive at that conclusion than it does the actual veracity of the statement. Sometimes total bullshit guesses end up being true. So I still think it's important to critical the conspiracy theory for the same reason you want to promote scientific inquiry. You have to filter good info from the bad. A classified report that we don't have access to, which has been read by the FBI, has led them to say with low confidence that it was probably a lab leak. They may or may not be.
FBI's moderate confidence. The Department of Energy, or
sorry,
FBI
the Department
moderate,
of Energy's low confidence. Yeah, the FBI's moderate.
Yeah.
Whether or not it ends up being true will be interesting in terms of future policy, but it doesn't really bear much fruit when it comes to like getting vaccinated or how to deal with COVID. It's more of a like.
But that's my whole point of why I emailed you. Like, the messaging on it was either conspiracy theory or you're a racist, and Trump didn't help with that. I'm not. To be very clear, I'm not. Trump was a fucking idiot about all of this shit. But by dismissing it out of hand, Fauci dismissing it out of hand, calling it conspiracy theory, all of the media calling it conspiracy theory, racist, and then now we're having the FBI saying moderate confidence, and if it comes out that it gets high confidence or proven, all of those people that you don't think exist on the fence about a lot of this stuff are gonna get pushed the other way because it was so vitriolic about anybody who brought that up at any point.
Well, to be fair, most of the time when people brought it up, it either was racist or conspiratorial in a way that is unproven, like the idea that it was a bioweapon or deliberately leaked by China, still commonly held conservative positions. And what's more, like, at the time, there was no reason to believe that. The only evidence for the claim was, like, the disease started in China and there was a lab in China, question mark, question mark. They did research on novel coronavirus, which plenty of labs do around the world. You know, we have to be careful with the processes here. I guess what I'm wondering is, like, what do you think Fauci should have said? Like, if there was no real evidence for that claim to begin with, should he have, like, shrugged and been like, anything's possible? Like how?
Well, have you seen what he's doing now? Have you seen, like, his recent CNN interview or
no,
anything
I didn't
like
see
that?
his recent interview.
The gist of it was basically, I'm open to anything. It seems like the evidence is moving that direction, but it could still be a natural origin. I'd like to see the evidence, basically.
Isn't that like
the gist of the messaging?
Isn't that a very science-based answer?
Yeah, and that should have been his answer in 2020.
But then you would say that about everything. Like, somebody might say, hey, did you know mRNA vaccines change your DNA? And he would be like, I don't believe that's true, but I'll wait to see the evidence. Like, I think it's okay.
No, that's not a fair comparison. As you've stated in this conversation, mRNA vaccines have a better track record prior to 2020 of the research into the development of them. So Fauci, as the head of the NIH and in the field for a long time, had pretty good evidence to make an assumption that, hey, these are going to be safe and effective. Correct?
What about the claim that it was a bioweapon? Like, should he have been like, well, could be, could not be, you know?
No, I mean, he has access to high levels of government, right? So we have pretty good intelligence. I've heard you talk about this in the context of the Chinese spy balloon. Hold on. I've heard you talk about this in the context of the Chinese spy balloon. We're all spying at each other at all times. If something like a bioweapon release was getting planned by the CCP, we might have some chatter on that, right? And something he would have some access to.
He's not necessarily cleared for top secret intel or like anything national security briefing related, outside of course, the overseeing of the pandemic as it exists. But even then, like,
do you think he got no information from intelligence agencies on the origins early on? Like, hey, there's some chatter in China in September, November of a respiratory virus going around Wuhan. Do you think he didn't hear anything about that?
I mean,
especially since
he would get info on the disease. I don't think they would go to him like giving him odds on the idea that it was a deliberate bioweapons leak.
Okay, so maybe he's not the person to do the messaging on that. Maybe someone from the DoD or the Pentagon that comes out and says, hey, we have zero intelligence on this. But they wouldn't have, Fauci would be the one to talk about the possibilities of a lab leak once they found the furin cleavage site, the S1, S2 receptor, and the proposal from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in 2019, that for basically a similar experiment to do a furin cleavage site between the S1 and 2 receptors in a bat coronavirus. Like, he had that information, and he would, and that he'd be the person to do the messaging on that.
Yeah, but I mean, there's research on the novel coronavirus going on all over the place. So I don't know if it's necessarily like it follows that because research like that was being done, it thus means that there needs to have been a lab leak. But I still feel so a lot of, but I want to ask, because like we're talking about public messaging here, right? Like, so one thing that would be his domain of expertise would be asking, hey, was this deliberately engineered by humans? And was this made to be a weapon to hurt humans? Now, personally, I think that's bullshit. I don't think that's true at all. Even if you believe it's a lab leak and you made the argument that it was a product of gain-of-function research, that gain-of-function research can be done for reasons that aren't bioweapon. In fact, overwhelmingly, that's why they're done, to learn more about the disease. So if somebody asks...
If I'm not making this clear, I don't think it's a bioweapon, and I don't think it was intentionally released or like made to hurt humans. I think they were doing research into, I think it was gain-of-function-esque, or if they want to call it, what was the other word? Chimera research, or whatever, the 4 or 5 different things they've called it.
But if somebody asked him, like, was this manufactured to hurt people? Do you think he should have said that's a conspiracy theory? Or do you think he should have said, like, I don't know, like, we'll have to see where the research goes? Because I think it's important for people like Dr. Fauci, who are the the avatars of this messaging to not like wish-wash on questions that are so leading and so conspiracy driven, like whether or not there's a lab leak when there wasn't really any evidence to support that case. It's like, okay, well, some people are saying
you can
it's a
make the
lab
same
leak.
argument for zoonotic. There wasn't good evidence for that either, and there still isn't.
For what?
A zoonotic transfer from animals.
Well, that was speculative. I don't think people were like, I don't think there was much like weight on the assumption of like, oh, well, where did this come from? Ah, well, here's a place it could have come from, you know. But there's
first
much
it was
more
bats,
weight.
and then it was pangolins, then it was ferrets, then it was. They speculated as much as they wanted on zoonotic release, but they weren't allowed to speculate on a lab leak of an accidental release, which we know happens.
Can you understand why there would be a difference in terms of the responsibility of open speculation between which animal species it might have come from and whether or not the Chinese government's irresponsible behavior directly led to the world's greatest pandemic of the past century? Like, maybe idle speculation on the latter might be a bit more irresponsible than the former?
Right, but if your argument for why Fauci had to vehemently oppose this early on is for clear public messaging, and it would have been irresponsible for him to say that, like, that seems silly. If
I don't think that any public official should be even entertaining the idea unless it's like proven, because the whole like COVID lab leak thing isn't an apolitical theory. It's being pushed mostly by far right nuts to gin up like anti-China war sentiment. People who are saying that like Fauci collaborated with the CCP to unleash a bioweapon to weaken American manufacturing. Like the problem is like all of this is so politically weighted that I feel like you need to meet a really high standard of proof before you can even entertain this stuff.
Yeah, but if you go really hard against it, and then 3 years later it comes out that likely you helped fund it, even if that was an acceptable way to do funding. I watched you go through that the other day. Like, even if that's all on the up and up about how they funded that lab through EcoHealth Alliance or whatever it was, his avoidance of those questions, his insistence that it could not be a lab leak, and then flipping 3 years later, that is going to contribute to messaging, and it's going to contribute to people in the center, which do exist, that are vaccine hesitant, or it's going to reduce trust if it comes out that that's the most likely option. And if all he had to do was just entertain the possibility early on and not be so insanely opposed to it, especially when there's a likelihood he was at least semi-tied to that lab, even if it's all fine, even if it's all reasonable reasons he's tied to that lab, it's easy to weaponize.
Yeah, just keep in mind there also would have been consequences to him being asked if it was a lab leak and him going like, I don't know. Like, that also would have had massive... So, like, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here. The best example that I can think of here, like, the best thing that I can think of is, like, I don't know. I'm going to try to think of, like, a ridiculous example here that's still spicy because it's me, okay? Let's say like that there's a right-wing conspiracy theory right after 9/11 that right before the towers fell, a guy left, and their evidence for this is that like there's kind of a blurry photo of somebody leaving one of the towers, and he looks kind of like, I don't know, he looks kind of like sneaky. And then the conspiracy is like, this guy's a Jew, and he left because he, as a Jewish person, knew about the towers falling beforehand. This isn't an exaggeration, by the way. The dancing Israelis thing is still like a really big like far-right talking point, even though it's completely retarded. Now, imagine this gets like really popular, and to the point where like some people, like New York officials, even like nationals, like, how do you feel about this man leaving? How do you feel about the claim this man was a Jew and he was informed by blah? And like a politician in this position obviously would have to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? No, like, stop this conspiracy bullshit. Anti-Semitism has no place in the world today. This is unacceptable. And then imagine, like, a while later, through some, like, bizarro investigation shit, it was found out, unbelievably, that the guy's last name was Goldstein. It doesn't... He didn't do anything. He literally just left the building at a lucky time. That was it. He just left. He just lucked out and didn't die that day. But it turns out his name was Goldstein. And now, instantly, it's like, interest. Everyone's, like, holding up the microphone. They're like, hey, how do you feel about the fact that it's been proven that that man was... And it's like... And the problem is, there was actually no right answer there from the public officials, because the right thing to do from the beginning was to denounce it as an insane conspiracy theory. And the right thing now is to go, like, well, okay, I mean, I guess he's Jewish, but that doesn't prove the rest of it. You know what I mean? It's not... In situations where people are like developing conspiratorial logic. You know what I mean, though, right? Like, you understand what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, no, I do. But you're acting like the only people who were saying the lab leak was Brett Weinstein, Joe Rogan, and Robert Malone. But it was Robert Redfield who was the director of the CDC. Like, and there was other scientists saying that.
Well, he went back on what he said, though.
He went back on what he said during the hearing 2 days ago.
No. Like earlier on, right? Was it a different guy who speculated in the lab leak thing, and then 4 days later during a press conference he said no? Or people were upset that internal documentation showed he had concerns with Fauci, but then publicly he denied it.
Yeah, that's a different guy. That's,
okay. Sorry, then I mixed them up. Yeah.
No, but I know what you're talking about, and that's again another part of this is like, well, hey, you have people internally.
Yeah, internal doubts public confidence. That's like a normal thing.
But did they not think any of this was going to come out and they were going to get raked over the coals for your own guys? Or
it's a normal thing. This is what I mean. Like, you keep saying, "Hey, didn't you know?" Well, hey, didn't you know there's a possibility that guy would be found to be named Goldstein? Like, there's no right answer here. If you don't denounce the conspiracy to begin with, you give them a ton of fuel. And then if it turns out through sheer happenstance, an element of the conspiracy ends up being true, and it's like, well, pretty suspicious, you denied it. Well, yeah, there was an evidentiary standard that wasn't met to begin with, you know?